Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking Leadership. This is Eric Perez, welcoming you back to our ongoing series of leadership discussions. For the sake of the listeners, I'll go through the background of my guest to give you some context as to what she's been doing. So she was formerly a partner with Grand Performance, which was a coaching and facilitation communications role. She has also been a presenter for the University of Sydney Centre for Continuing Education, and is currently, and has been for quite some time, at least 16 years, the leadership development and emotional intelligence expert. Can I welcome to the podcast Angela Heise? Hello, Angela.
Hi, Eric. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for joining me. So I will start where I've started with all my previous podcasts and ask you the following. In which industry was your first leadership role, and why did you take on that role, Angela?
My first leadership role was in furnishing textiles, and I took it on because it was in Hong Kong, and it seemed to be a really interesting opportunity for me to stretch into, leading people, running a business world that was all around Southeast Asia at the time. And given that I was 25 years old, I didn't really have any qualms about accepting a role that I turned out to be, in the beginning, hopelessly underqualified for. Because all of a sudden, I was in charge of 6 people who looked to me for guidance and for marketing plans and all sorts of other things, none of which was in place. So it was a really interesting experience initially.
Okay, so that role, were you actively pursued it, or were you tapped on the shoulder to do it?
I was tapped on the shoulder to do it. I used to work in Taiwan, and that was not a leadership role. That was very much a follower role, because my boss was, what do they call them? A micromanager. He was a lovely guy, but he was the leader. He was the manager, and he controlled everything. And so when I was offered this role, it was for an Austrian company, and they said, just go and do it. We give you carte blanche. Here you go. You've got people. Just set it all up.
Wow.
And
okay.
That's what I did.
Yeah, we'll talk about being thrown in the deep end. Look, I'd like to come back to that, but just as a function of your leadership roles in the past, could you share with me, from that experience, what you see as a difference between leadership and management?
Well, first of all, let me say you need to be both. You can't just be a manager and you can't just be a leader. You actually need to hold both ends of the spectrum. I think as a leader, you need to be focused on the process, and as a manager, you're focused on the outcome. And so my experience is that if you are just too much of a leader and you're dropping the outcomes, it really doesn't work. You have to have your KPIs, you have to have all of that in place. But it's a question of whether you want to control the outcomes and then strictly be a manager, which is also about treating people like tasks, or whether you want to be somebody who leads and influences and inspires people, and in that way helps people create the results. So again, I think you need to have both, but you can be a leader probably more easily and achieve results. When you're a manager and you don't have any leadership qualities, it's probably going to be much, much more difficult. Because again, there's no inspiration. As they say, leaders have people who follow them, and managers have people who work for them. And in today's world, people look for meaning. They don't just look for a job.
Wow, that's a very different response to I've had to that question before. So just can I unpack that a little bit with you? So you're saying the management and leadership function is really a spectrum with leadership and management on either end, or it's a combination of the two? I'm just trying to get a mental model happening here when you're talking about that. So in a work context, and asking that question again, it's not about a difference, as you need to have competencies and capabilities of both to be able to do work in a modern workplace. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, it's basically, let me give my background of, having lived in Asia for so long. It's like the yin yang. the black and white model with the dots, and the black dot in the white area and the white dot in the black area. You need to have both. It's in balance. You have to actually be able to have the empathy that you need as a leader to be able to deal with the person, but you also have to be able to lead towards an outcome. So you just have to be able to say, right now, it's about being effective and it's about following a process, but communicating in such a way that the person will still be inspired. If you just go in and saying, this is what we're doing, everybody buckle up, let's just go for it, you probably lose some people along the way, because there's a certain style that goes with it that people don't necessarily respond to very well anymore. Used to be able to get away with that maybe 20, 30 years ago. These days you don't.
Thank you, Angela. That segues nicely into the next question. So leaders sometimes make mistakes, like we all do. How do you engage with an error or a mistake that's attributed to your leadership?
Own it. It's as simple as that. Raise my hand and say, I screwed up. I'm sorry. This is what I've learned. This is what I'm going to do differently next time. And debrief it with whoever's involved and then move on. And it's about it's about moving forward. A lot of times when people admit to mistakes, they go into blame. They look at who's at fault. They look for what went wrong, and it goes into that deep analysis paralysis, and it gets very emotional. And then people don't want to make mistakes anymore, either as a leader or as a follower. And what it becomes that place where people just want to stay safe. And so they protect themselves, and that means they don't take risks anymore. No calculated risks, no innovation, nothing. So if I model that as a leader, and I go in and say, I never make mistakes, and if I do, it's everybody else's fault, then it's going to get really difficult very quickly, because, again, that doesn't inspire people. People want to take risks. They want to be able to stretch and grow, and, again, have that purpose and that meaning. So when somebody says, I'm not perfect, that gives people permission to be the same. And, again, stretch and grow. And that, I think, is the purpose of life. It's about growing, not about staying safe all the time.
Okay, so that I'm particularly interested in that last statement around the leader. By admitting that you're fallible, you give people permission to make mistakes and also take some risks. Is that an important part of your travels as a leader? Is to allow others, or give them the ability to get in and have a go, and if they do make a mistake, it's not going to be the end of the world?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, it's about, and it's not about saying. There's a very good model by Ken Blanchard called the Situational Leadership, and it's about encouraging people to take risks, but it's depending on where they sit with regards to their competency. If you've got somebody who's really just starting out on their journey in a specific skill, you're not going to give them something that's really risky. Let me put it this way: if somebody has just learned how to drive a car, you're not going to ask them to go into peak hour traffic in the pouring rain and go to an important meeting on the other side of town. But that's often what people do. And then when something doesn't work out, then they get why you should have known better. You've done this once before. Why don't you know how to do this? But when we educate people into, yes, it's okay to make a mistake, but at the same time, when they start getting really careful and they go into, now I'm going to check in with my leader every 5 minutes to make sure that everything is okay. It's the ability to have the conversation saying, hey, I've noticed we have the same conversation and you keep making the same mistake. What's in the way? What's going on? And a lot of people don't have that conversation. And we've had this, you may recall this, we've had this conversation about the parent-child. So that a lot of so-called leaders are actually coming from that parent model. And so when I come from parent, then of course I don't make mistakes. And then the people around me who make mistakes, I can then punish like children.
Yep.
And when I come from that adult to adult model where we're moving together and we hold each other accountable, not from a place of blame, but from what are we going to do differently so it doesn't happen again, then things change radically.
Yet again, another interesting perspective. So, Angela, in your travels, what do you think is the most difficult part of being a leader for you?
for me, it used to be, until I learned better, not having boundaries between being a friend and being a boss. And boss in quotes, because, it's and I find that sometimes it's really difficult, because it would be so much easier to say, I'm your friend and let's work this out together. And it's being the buddy, and because we're friends, we can work this out. As a leader, we sometimes actually have to be able to say, I'm going to make a hard decision here right now. And this is part of, this is the manager. There are some business needs that have to be mindful of. So it's the importance to be able to say, we have a good working relationship, and yes, we may be friends, but right now I'm talking to you as your leader. Right now I'm talking to you as somebody who works with you. So let's separate that out. That has nothing to do with our personal relationship. And again, being mindful of those professional boundaries is also important when we're venting. It's really easy to talk to somebody and saying, I'm having a really shitty day right now, or business is not going well, or whatever it might be, personal as well as professionally. That's often very inappropriate, because people want to have a leader who helps them get, create that sense of direction, that inspiration. So when we wobble and we communicate that wobble, they start wobbling as well. Again, it doesn't mean we have to be perfect, but please don't tell them that the wheels are just about to fall off.
Yeah, sure. Angela, could I ask you the next questions around success? So how do you measure success as a leader?
First and foremost, it's when there's open communication. When somebody trusts me enough to say, hey, could we do this differently? Or I've got some ideas here and I may not agree with you. And it's about respectfully challenging me. So respect is, for me, is one of the really important things when I deal with people. I always say to people, challenge my behavior, but please respect me for who I am.
Can I ask, sorry, Angela, can I ask you just a follow-up there before I forget? So at the start of the podcast, you mentioned your first leadership experience was in was it Hong Kong or okay. So you were working there, and obviously you have to get acclimatized to the business culture as well as the societal culture. Do you think that's had an influence on how you apply your leadership thinking? And why I asked that question is you just mentioned then that respect is a very important thing to you. Is that something you've drawn from the cultures you've worked in that weren't your own, or is that just what's driven you as a leader from day one, irrespective of where you've worked?
It's probably helped that I've worked in Asia, because Asia is very, very adverse to expressing strong emotions or being disrespectful. They call, the losing face is a very important aspect of Asian culture. So if you embarrass somebody, or if you challenge somebody, or if you belittle somebody, that's really bad taste. So you would never do that. So again, yes, respect is very important. But I also grew up in a culture, German obviously, which is very much, we look up to the leaders, and they have the authority to do whatever they want. So yelling, screaming, shouting was perfectly acceptable, and nobody was really allowed to say anything, because that was the prerogative. As soon as you reached a certain position, you were allowed to behave any way you wanted to, because you had earned the right to do that. And I never found that particularly respectful. It's just something that and it's not that it was something that was modeled in my family. I mean, my father was pretty much that kind of leader, and he did it not from a place of bad, intention. It was just the cultural model that he was following. And I just looked at that from a very early age, and looked at the people around me and thought, why are we doing this? This is creating stress. And I had no idea about the physical effects of stress at that point, or, how we can actually really trigger people into becoming traumatized. Not that we're responsible for other people's responses, but we can support people's stress. I mean, let me put it this way. Stress leave is one of the highest problems, or one of the biggest problems we have these days. People go on sick leave for stress all the time. So I'd rather not contribute as a leader to that.
Yeah, sure. And because we spend so much time in our workplaces, that you want to make that that time and work as productive and stress free as you can possibly make it. I mean, one of the underlying things there is that there's always going to be a degree of tension in any workplace, because you're trying to achieve things, you're trying to get somewhere. No one sets up a business, whether it's for profit or not for profit, just to set it up and just for it to exist without doing something. So that tension in the doing of whatever it is your goal is, or your whatever the KPI is, whatever the outcome you're striving to achieve, is going to involve a degree of stress. But I guess if you're doing your job right as a leader, now this is me editorializing here, I think you can get there by creating a workplace that allows you to get there with the least amount of stress that is humanly possible. But you'll never eliminate it completely, I don't think.
We need stress. I mean, we need stress just to get out of bed. Like our stress hormone cortisol that is highest in the morning. It gets us out of bed literally. It manages blood sugar, it manages insulin. If we don't have cortisol in the morning, we would not be able to get up. There wouldn't be enough blood to get us going in the head. Sure. So we actually require a certain amount of stress to keep going. Anybody who is not stressed is not productive. But we can go to the highest level of stress and then collapse. And I think what we're doing is we're really pushing the envelope these days. So saying that, I think building resilience is really important as well. You can't mollycoddle people. You can't take the stress away from them. That flips the critical parent then, who constantly criticizes, into what I call the benevolent parent, who then protects the children from having problems. And so it's the helicopter parent, who makes sure that everything is okay. And so when we teach people to take risks, to make mistakes, but not punish them for it, but encourage them to step up more and more, that's when people really show up. And that I think that's also the hallmark of a good leader, is that when things get tough, these people stick around. They don't just walk away and go, I think I'm going to find myself a different job because the stress levels are too high. But they actually take on an active role and get solution focused and say, let's do this. And that was my biggest result. That was my biggest pride when I was in Hong Kong. We went through hell because we had a mother company that changed the rules every 5 minutes. And I didn't lose a single member of my team in the whole time I was there. They all stuck around. And we had some really big issues to deal with. And it was, it was great. We built a really, really highly functioning team. Just wish we had a better product.
Sure. And that's something well beyond our control. Look, Angela, can I ask, I've got a couple of statements here, and I'd like to get your feedback on them if I could. On the job experience develops better leaders. What's your view of that?
I think you need experience. This is one of the things that I know. There are a lot of programs these days that actually encourage people to not just go to university, but to gain job experience as well. Because when you've got people who've just come out of a highly qualifying educational system, but they don't have any experience, they often, again, they become really good managers, but not necessarily good leaders because they go by the book. And unfortunately, people don't go by the book. I mean, I always say to my clients, if I could download, whatever program is needed to be able to deal with certain situations, I'd be a billionaire, but right. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that.
Sure. So as I think an extension of that statement, here's the second one. Formal education helps to develop better leaders.
Yes, it does. And again, it depends on what you consider to be formal education. Okay, I mean, I am all in favor of research and science and all of that. I mean, I have a background as an academic. I mean, I came this close to becoming a professor. But I really think that it's important to make education applicable to the job that you're going into. I can fill my head with all sorts of theories and statistics and how to go about something theoretically. If it's not something that's actually allows me to function better in the job that I'm in, it's just something that I think is just clutters up the brain and can often get in the way of dealing with the situation at hand.
Sure, and part of the definition for formal, that's why I didn't go, maybe formal's not the right word, but I wasn't just going to limit it to university, because there is TAFE, there are professional courses you can take, there are institutes that offer courses in lots of different areas. So that's all I meant by formal education, something that you've got to go out and earn a bit of paper or get some qualification under your belt to do part or some part of your role. So here's the final statement, and I'm curious to see how you'll respond to this one. Leaders are born, not made.
Well, I've been thinking about that one. There are people who say, yes, people are born leaders. We're also shaped by our experiences. Yes, we've got nature and nurture. So we've got genetics on one hand and we've got education on the other. But we can change. Human beings can change. We are very adaptable. Our brain changes all the time. It's completely plastic. So whatever experiences we have, and that what we want to challenge ourselves on and what we want to learn, we can actually learn. And maybe there's some predispositions. But I mean, if you had told me 30 years ago that I would be standing in front of 500 people and give a presentation in a country that I'd never been to, I would have gone, pigs will fly. I would rather jump off a building than do that. But I worked on myself and I don't have any problems talking to people anymore. I used to be so shy that I would literally, and that was still in university, whisper to my neighbor, would you please ask this question or make this comment, because I couldn't do it myself.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So,
wow.
So being thrown into the deep end in this job in Hong Kong, I had to step up. So, again, was I born a leader? I don't know. I know people who have really changed. They have really stepped up once they've had some formal training and once they've had some experience. I think both need to go hand in hand. And this is why I'm involved in leadership education. I run courses that are not about, yes, there's some theory in it, but it's mostly about skills that are really important as a leader. And this is what I learned when I worked in Hong Kong. It is the ability to build trust. It's the ability to communicate. It's the ability to deal with so-called conflict. It's the ability to empower people in such a way that they want to show up. Those are all skills that we don't learn in leadership courses, in the courses that are business oriented. That's where we learn to be really good managers, even though they are leadership courses.
Okay. That particular comment, look, I could talk to you for hours on that, but we don't have hours to talk about that one, but I will come back to you on that at some point. So look, and this is a part of the podcast where I get to ask a question around some of the studies that I'm doing at the moment. So I'm completing some my PhD studies, leadership development, and because I want to get the thing done within a certain time frame, I've had to sort of limit what I'm looking at. And in terms of the most critical leadership skills in the agriculture sector, which is where my focus is, I've looked at strategic thinking and foresight as being some of the core leader capabilities into the future for that sector. Now, I'm not looking for a debate around that with the podcast guests or yourself. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on strategic thinking and foresight as leader capabilities.
I think strategic thinking and foresight are absolutely crucial. And I'm putting a caveat around that, as long as they're also built around people. So if it's just about strategic outcomes with regards to how much money are we going to create for the shareholders, how are we going to grow and all of that, without considering how, I think that's really, really important. It's about building the trust so people can contribute to that strategic planning and to that thinking. And because eventually, I think the most crucial job of a leader is actually to create more leaders.
Okay. That's a first. So yeah, okay, that's interesting. And look, some people in leadership roles, and I've met them in my travels, and I'm sure you have yourself, have worked so long and hard to get to a particular position that that kind of thinking is not there because it's been about them. And some of the more interesting perspectives that have been thrown up at me in the podcast, and you've thrown it up here, is it more about letting go of your own ego in this and to look to develop others, which then has benefits for you and the organization as a whole? Because if you're allowing people to make mistakes, to challenge some thinking, or within a context of being constructive, that if you allow people an opportunity to grow, it has benefits for everything else that you're doing. That's the sense that I'm getting from talking to the podcast people and yourself on this one. And yeah, look, I'm never going to assume, and I'm not doing that in my thesis, that these two areas that I'm looking at are the only critical leader capabilities. But if I looked at everything, I'd never get the piece of work I'm trying to do finished. So, and I see you smiling at that, and that's always part of studies. And I think when I get the chance to do some postgraduate work, that would be the next area that I want to look at, is the what the literature says are the key leader capabilities versus some of the other leader capabilities that are out there, and how much do they mesh together. Because and I'd like to get your view on this, is there isn't a perfect, I think, set of leadership skills that make for very good leaders. I think it's person specific, and it's also context specific. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, again, you need to be in some context. You have to be probably a bit more directive than in other ones. It depends on the industry. I mean, you don't want to sit in front of somebody who's doing a crucial job that involves moving heavy machinery that is really, potentially life-threatening. You don't want to start inviting their, opinion about something when something has to be really happening right now to save a life.
Sure.
But again, it's just like there's a whole bandwidth of skills involved. And I think we probably need to broaden it a little bit, because we're shifting out of this paradigm where results are the only thing that matters. You've probably heard that there's an organization in the US, and they are the Business Roundtable. They recently issued a statement that says that they're going to focus more on employee well-being and all sorts of other things that are internal, that are more about the people they work with rather than on shareholder benefit, because they realize that it doesn't work. When it's cutthroat and when it's just about money and all about profit, it just doesn't work anymore. And I mean, if you look around in the world, we can see that. It just doesn't work anymore. And so something's got to give. We have to shift consciousness. So leader now is a much bigger role. We need to really develop intelligences that were not required before. Social intelligence, emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence. All of these intelligences that are more about people and the larger world, that then help us move forward into creating the results, rather than going results first, people next or last.
Sure. And look, I'll put that, I'll get the link to that statement and put it on the podcast so people can have a look at it, because that to me sounds like a paradigm shifting statement, that it's not about the externals as much as it is about getting your house in order.
Yeah.
To be able to deal with the stuff externally. And that is, from my reading of some of the literature, is contrary to what has been the what would you call it, the established thinking around how you deal with the world of work. And so, yeah, I'd be very interested to get that out and have a read of it myself. I didn't know that existed. And so for the listeners, I've learned something again through my guests on the podcast. So thank you for that, Angela. Look, the last question I have here is retrospective in some senses. What might you say to a younger version of yourself about being an effective leader?
First of all, deal with people from adult to adult. Don't become a parent. Let them handle their own needs, let them learn, and do it from a place of, again, we've talked about that before, make mistakes and move on eventually. The other thing is, of course, aim to be respected and not liked. Because if your goal is to be liked, you're going to start sacrificing your effectiveness. But at the same time, don't be so effective that you lose all the empathy. And then, of course, it's always empower progress. I like this saying, progress is better than perfection. So it's about just moving forwards. And well, while you do that, just don't stop sweating the small stuff. You know, it's life is too short to get upset about little things that don't matter the next day. And so it's important to detox every now and then and let go of the things that seemingly, when they accumulate, have a really big effect. I call that, we have an internal toxin vat. And what we do is we just stuff all the things that annoy us, that frustrate us, that get us angry, and we stuff that into that vat. And at the same time, we have a willpower vat. And as the willpower vat goes down during the day, as we make our 20,000 plus decisions, and the toxicity vat comes up, there comes a level where everything just basically explodes. And if as a leader we learn how to detox in such a way that it doesn't impact on the people around us, it makes the world of difference, because all of a sudden we become a stable reference point for people rather than somebody we have to tiptoe around.
Wow, that's an exceptionally positive way to end the podcast. So talking to Angela Heise, I appreciate your time, Angela. Thank you so much, Eric. I know we could talk about this for many more hours. Thanks very much. So for those listening, that was Talking Leadership, and I'll catch you all on the next podcast. Thanks very much.